Everything that later generations would call Western civilization, philosophy, political thought, tragedy, science, and democracy itself, once stood on the edge of extinction. The threat came from the east. In 480 B.C., after crushing the Spartan stand at the hot gates of Thermopylae, Xerxes I believed the conquest of Greece was no longer a question, but a formality. The Persian Empire had crossed into Europe in overwhelming force, and now the great king looked upon the final stage of Greek resistance with cold and royal confidence. From his elevated throne on Mount Aegialeos, Xerxes gazed down at the straits of Salamis, certain he was about to witness the death of Greek freedom. He expected confusion. He expected flight. He expected to see the Greek fleet dissolve beneath the pressure of Persian numbers and imperial might. But the Greeks had not come to Salamis to run. As the first light spread across the sea, Xerxes found not a fleeing enemy, but a fleet standing firm in grim defiance. These were not men preparing for escape. These were men waiting for the moment to strike. The narrow waters before him had already been turned into a weapon. The trap had already been sprung in the mind of Themistocles long before the first ram struck wood. By sunset, those waters would no longer belong to Persia. They would become a graveyard, and the battle fought there would do more than decide a war. It would decide whether Greece, and all that Greece might still give to the world, would live or perish. This conflict began long before the first Persian ship appeared off the coast of Greece. Its roots reached back nearly 20 years, to a moment when Athens crossed a line the Persian kings would never forgive. In 499 B.E., the Athenians supported the Ionian revolt and took part in the burning of Sardis, a rich and symbolic center of Persian power in Asia Minor. To the great king, it was not merely rebellion, it was insult. Darius answered with invasion, but his first attempt ended in disaster at Marathon. The shame of that defeat lingered, and when his son Xerxes inherited the throne, he also inherited the duty to avenge it. So in 480 B.C., Persia came again, this time with a force so vast that it seemed less like an army than a moving world. Xerxes bridged the Hellespont, marched westward with immense land forces, and brought with him a fleet to match. His purpose was simple and merciless: destroy Athens, break Greek resistance, and make an example of all who had once defied Persia. Faced with the threat of annihilation, the Athenians sought divine counsel. The Oracle of Delphi offered a strange instruction: trust in the wooden wall. Many heard those words and imagined fortifying the city with timber palisades. But Themistocles, the most far-seeing statesman in Athens, understood the prophecy differently. He argued that the wooden wall meant ships. With that vision, he convinced Athens to devote the riches of its silver mines to the construction of 200 warships, turning the city's fortune into a naval shield. Yet even with this preparation, the Persians could not be stopped by vision alone. Once Thermopylae had fallen and the Spartan defense was broken, the way into southern Greece was exposed. Persia swept into Athens and burned it. The temples on the Acropolis went up in flames, and the city became a monument to Persian revenge. For the Athenians, there was no saving the city now. What could be saved was the war itself. The people and the remnants of the armed force withdrew across the water to Salamis. There, on that cramped island, and in the narrow straits around it, the Greeks made their final stand. The city was lost. The sea would decide whether Greece followed it into ruin. Before the Battle of Salamis could be fought, Greece first had to survive itself. The alliance was fraying. The Peloponnesian commanders, especially Adamantus of Corinth, argued that the fleet should withdraw south to the Isthmus of Corinth and make it stand there. near their own homes and behind defensive works already under construction. Their logic was understandable. Why risk everything in a narrow channel so close to ruined Athens? But to Themistocles, retreat was not caution, it was ruin. He knew that once the fleet moved into open sea, the Persians would gain exactly the kind of battle they wanted. Their larger numbers and broader deployment would overwhelm the Greeks. At Salamis, the narrows worked like a shield. In open waters, that shield would vanish. So Themistocles argued fiercely that the fleet must remain where the geography could fight beside them. And when persuasion was no longer enough, he issued a brutal ultimatum. If the Allies abandoned Salamis, Athens would withdraw its entire fleet and sail away. Since Athens provided the backbone of Greek naval strength, that threat silenced the alliance at once. Still, Themistocles did not trust unity born from fear alone. He knew some allies might lose heart before battle, so he made sure there would be no retreat left to choose. In one of history's most brilliant acts of deception, he secretly sent a servant to Xerxes with a lie dressed as intelligence. The Greeks were divided, frightened, and preparing to flee by night. It was exactly the message the Persian king was most eager to hear. To Xerxes, it promised not a battle, but an easy victory. Yet, not all in the Persian camp were blind. Artemisia, queen of Halicarnassus, warned Xerxes against rushing into a naval engagement. She urged patience. "Let the Greek alliance splinter under pressure," she said, "and they would defeat themselves." She also understood that many Persian subject fleets would not perform well against seasoned Greek crews in constricted waters. But Xerxes did not want patience. He wanted triumph. Driven by pride and false confidence, he dismissed Artemisia's warning and chose action over wisdom. So in the dead of night, the Persian fleet moved to blockade the straits and trap the Greeks by dawn. But what looked bold was deeply costly. Persian rowers spent the entire night straining at the oars, maneuvering in darkness and confusion, trying to hold a giant fleet in difficult waters. The Greeks, by contrast, remained sheltered and rested, conserving their strength for the dawn. By the time the first light touched the sea, the Persians had already spent much of their endurance. Themistocles had not merely set a trap of geography. He had set a trap of fatigue, impatience, and pride. As the first light of morning spread across Salamis, the Persian king sat in confidence. Xerxes expected to witness the final destruction of the Greek fleet. Before him, the Greeks appeared to be retreating, pulling back in what looked like fear and disorder. Persian commanders saw weakness and moved to exploit it. Their ships advanced deeper into the straits, pressing forward in growing density, convinced that the enemy was trying to flee. In truth, they were sailing exactly where Themistocles wanted them. Then the deception ended. At the decisive instant, when the wind turned and the Persian fleet had committed itself too far into the narrow waters, the Greek signal was given. War horns echoed across the straits. The Greek triremes, nearly 368 in number, pivoted sharply and drove forward in a full attack. What moments earlier had seemed hesitation was revealed as calculated theater. The Greeks were not fleeing. They had been waiting. The Persian fleet now discovered the true danger of the narrows. Their numbers, so terrible in open water, became a curse in confined sea. Ships crowded into one another, oars splintered, hulls slammed together, and formations disintegrated before the Greeks had even finished their charge. In that instant of disorder, Greek triremes struck hard and fast. Bronze rams smashed into the sides of Persian ships, tearing open hulls and breaking the invaders' cohesion. Greek contingents from Aegina and Corinth pressed inward from the flanks, sealing the confusion into a killing zone. As more ships jammed together, the battle changed character. It was no longer only a contest of rams and rowing. It became a close-quarters struggle of decks, blades, and bodies. Greek hoplites boarded the Persian vessels, bringing bronze armor, long spears, and disciplined violence into confined spaces where the lighter Persian marines could not stand against them. Men fell into the sea in great numbers. Many could not swim, and the waters became a graveyard. From his watching place, Xerxes saw not triumph, but ruin. His fleet was collapsing before him, and the great imperial machine that had crossed into Greece now seemed helpless. In fury, he turned on his own commanders. Some Phoenician captains were accused of cowardice and executed at once, victims not of Greek steel, but of royal rage. And amid this destruction, Artemisia of Halicarnassus escaped in one of the strangest episodes of the battle. Hounded by an Athenian ship, she rammed a fellow Persian vessel and sank it, creating an opening to flee. The Athenian captain, deceived by the act, abandoned pursuit. Xerxes, seeing only the result from afar, believed she had destroyed a Greek enemy, and praised her courage, lamenting that his men had become women, while his women had become men. By nightfall, the Persian fleet had been broken. Its remnants withdrew in humiliation, leaving the straits to the Greeks. The Greek alliance had lost only about 40 ships, while Persia lost more than 200, along with a vast number of trained men. Salamis was not merely a Greek victory. It was the collapse of Persian naval supremacy in a single day. Salamis did not annihilate Xerxes' army, but it did something perhaps even more decisive. It shattered the illusion that Persia's victory was inevitable. The great king still possessed a vast land force, but the loss of naval dominance changed everything. Without command of the sea, his supply lines were no longer secure. And the deeper he remained in Greece, the more dangerous his position became. What had begun as a march of imperial certainty now carried the risk of isolation and entrapment. Xerxes, once so certain of conquest, now began to think of survival. Following the advice of Artemisia, he withdrew to Asia with much of his army, leaving Mardonius behind with elite troops and orders to finish Greece in the next campaign season. Yet, Mardonius would never complete that mission. In 479 B.C., at the Battle of Plataea, the Greek alliance rose in force and crushed the Persian land army in one of the decisive battles of the ancient world. Mardonius himself was slain, and with his death, the Persian campaign in Greece began to collapse. Then, almost as if history were striking with both hands at once, the Greek fleet won another major victory at Mycale, destroying the remnants of Persian maritime strength on the same day. Persia's offensive power in the Aegean was broken. The invasion had failed, not merely delayed, not merely checked, but undone. This is why Salamis stands as one of the great hinges of history. It was not just a naval battle. It was the moment that preserved Greek freedom at the instant it was closest to being extinguished. Because Salamis was won, Athens would rise again. Because Athens would rise again, the world would later inherit its philosophy, its theater, its art, its science, and its radical experiments in civic life. The victory at Salamis did not just save a people. It safeguarded the conditions under which an entire civilizational tradition could flourish. And the memory of that struggle endured. More than 150 years later, Alexander the Great would lead Macedonian and Greek arms across the sea into Asia, not to defend Greece, but to conquer the Persian world itself. What Xerxes had once sought to impose upon Greece was at last answered in reverse. Empire had come westward, and history would one day carry vengeance back east. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most important conflicts, please like, subscribe, and support the channel so we can continue exploring the battles that changed our world. We'll see you in the next story.